June 4th, 1943. Recreation Hall, Camp Hearne, Texas. The fountain pen trembled in Oberleutnant Hermann Fischer's hand as he scribbled in his concealed journal, recording thoughts that would have earned him a beating from his own SS guards if discovered in Africa. The Americans are showing us their films, not propaganda reels, but actual Hollywood cinema. What we saw tonight cannot be real. No nation at war possesses such capability. Through the makeshift theatre's projection beam, he had just witnessed something that shattered 4 years of Nazi indoctrination. 200 German officers of Rommel's defeated Afrika Korps sat transfixed as Vivian Leigh swept across the screen in Gone with the Wind, a film depicting America's own civil war, their own defeat, their own reconstruction. The Technicolor spectacle, the orchestral score, the sheer scope of production values overwhelmed men who believed American culture consisted of jazz music and gangster films. In Germany, Goebbels' film industry could barely manage black-and-white propaganda reels. Yet here, in what Nazi leadership had described as a mongrel nation of cultural inferiors, prisoners watched a 4-hour epic that had cost $3.85 million to produce, more than the entire German film industry's annual budget. 1,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped down from the passenger train that had brought them to Hearne just 1 day earlier. The entire population of the small Texas town had turned out to witness their arrival. What none of them understood was that this moment would trigger the most unexpected psychological transformation in military detention history, a systematic reconstruction of Nazi consciousness through the hypnotic power of Hollywood's dream factory. The mathematics of ideological conversion were being calculated not in interrogation rooms, but in darkened theatres where American films flickered against wooden walls, projecting stories that would shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and the world order they'd fought to establish. The capitulation had begun on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, who had replaced the legendary Rommel, surrendered along with approximately 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Wehrmacht's elite desert warriors, men who had driven the British back to El Alamein, who had earned Churchill's respect, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter, holder of the Knight's Cross, veteran of Poland and France. The journey from capture to revelation began in the transit camps of North Africa. As Richter and thousands of other POWs waited for transport ships, American efficiency was already beginning to crack their preconceptions. But nothing had prepared them for what awaited in America's heartland. Not just the material abundance they would witness, but the cultural sophistication of a nation they'd been taught to despise. The first hint came aboard the Liberty ships carrying them across the Atlantic. In the enlisted men's mess, a projector had been set up. Feldwebel Otto Kraus, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, later recalled, "On the ship to America, they showed us a film, Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator. German soldiers watching a Jewish actor mock the Führer. We didn't know whether to be offended or amazed. Most of us had never seen Chaplin. His films were banned since 1933. Prisoners had private radios, and movies were shown as often as 4 nights a week. If the camp did not have a projector, prisoners often pooled their savings to purchase one." The American military had discovered something remarkable. Hollywood films were proving more effective than any propaganda lecture in demonstrating American values and capabilities. August 15, 1943. Camp Clinton, Mississippi. The base camp had just completed construction of its theatre, a facility built by the prisoners themselves that could seat several hundred men. 25 generals were housed there along with several colonels, majors, and captains. General Gustav von Wurst, one of the highest-ranking German officers held at Clinton, stood at the back of the hall as the lights dimmed for the inaugural screening. The film was Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It was incomprehensible, von Wurst would later recall. Here was an American film showing corruption in their own government, a naive man fighting their political system, newspapers attacking their leaders. In Germany, such a film would mean death for everyone involved, yet they showed it to enemy prisoners. The cinema served as an important re-education and propaganda tool as well as entertainment, with Hollywood anti-Nazi films, cartoons such as Hair Meets Hair and the Why We Fight series used. American World War II films shown mostly dealt with the Pacific War. The projection equipment itself became an object of fascination. The camps used 16mm Bell and Howell projectors, machines that ran so smoothly and quietly that German technicians, who prided themselves on mechanical excellence, spent hours studying their construction. Unteroffizier Friedrich Becker, an engineer from Zeiss Optical Works, observed, "The precision of American projectors exceeded anything we produced. They ran for hours without overheating. The sound synchronization was perfect. We began to understand that American technical superiority extended to every field." October 3, 1943, Camp Hearne, Texas. The prisoners at Camp Hearne had theatre, complete with orchestra pit, where they performed elaborate skits and plays. But tonight, German POWs crowded into the theatre for a special screening. The film was Mrs. Miniver, MGM's Academy Award-winning drama about British resilience during the Blitz. Hauptmann Erich Müller, a Luftwaffe pilot who had bombed London, sat in the third row. He would later describe the experience. "We had destroyed British cities. We knew the damage we'd inflicted. Yet here was a film showing British courage with such sympathy, such humanity, that German soldiers were weeping for British civilians." Joseph Goebbels grudgingly praised the drama's remarkable impact. Mrs. Miniver shows the destiny of a family during the current war, and its refined, powerful propagandistic tendency was up to now only been dreamed of. There is not a single angry word spoken against Germany. Nevertheless, the anti-German tendency is perfectly accomplished. The film's technical excellence overwhelmed the German officers. The cinematography by Joseph Ruttenberg, the score by Herbert Stothart, the seamless editing, every element demonstrated a level of filmmaking sophistication that German cinema couldn't approach. More disturbing still was the film's emotional power. These Wehrmacht officers, many of whom had participated in the London raids, found themselves sympathising with British victims. Winston Churchill once said that this film had done more for the war effort than a flotilla of destroyers. The German prisoners were beginning to understand why. November 1943 marked a turning point in the film programme. The Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had decided to begin showing Frank Capra's Why We Fight series to German POWs. The decision was controversial. These films used captured German footage, including scenes from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, turned against its creators. Academy Award-winning filmmaker Frank Capra, daunted but impressed and challenged by Leni Riefenstahl's 1935 propaganda film Triumph of the Will, worked in direct response. His goal became to let the enemy prove to our soldiers the enormity of his cause and the justness of ours. He would compile enemy speeches, films, newsreels, newspaper articles, with a list of the enemy's hostile actions. Camp McCain housed 7,700, Camp Clinton 3,400, and Camp Shelby housed 5,300. At Camp McCain near Grenada, Mississippi, the first screening of Prelude to War caused an uproar. SS officers attempted to organize a boycott. They were immediately transferred to Camp Alva, Oklahoma, the special detention center for unrepentant Nazis. But most prisoners watched, transfixed by seeing their own propaganda transformed into evidence against them. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "To see the Nuremberg rallies, which had filled us with such pride, presented as evidence of our militaristic aggression, it was like watching your life through a different lens. Everything the same, yet everything reversed." The series achieved something unexpected for German POWs. It provided context for Germany's actions that even Germans hadn't possessed. Many prisoners had never seen the full scope of Nazi rallies. had never heard complete Hitler speeches, had never understood how their nation appeared to the outside world. What most astonished German POWs was Hollywood's willingness to criticize America itself. In December 1943, Camp Shelby showed John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath. The depiction of American poverty during the Depression, the criticism of banks and authorities, the sympathy for common people, it defied everything Nazi propaganda had taught about American capitalism. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Hoffmann, a former Nazi Party education officer, noted, "They show their own failures, their own injustices. No German film under Hitler could show German poverty, German suffering caused by German institutions. This self-criticism was not weakness, it was strength we couldn't comprehend." The camp libraries began receiving requests for John Steinbeck's novel. Within months, translation circles had formed, with POWs creating handwritten German versions of American literature they discovered through films. The American camp authorities, rather than forbidding this activity, encouraged it. Major Edward Davison, chief of the Special Projects Division Education Program, reported in January 1944, "The prisoners' consumption of American literature has increased 400% since the expanded film program began. They want to read the sources of the films. Gone with the Wind led to requests for books about the American Civil War. The Grapes of Wrath sparked interest in the Depression." An unexpected catalyst for psychological change came from Walt Disney. In February 1944, Camp Hearne began showing Disney animations before feature films. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio and Fantasia created sensations among the German prisoners. These weren't propaganda films, they were pure entertainment, yet their impact was profound. Hauptmann Otto Kleist observed, "To see Fantasia, this marriage of animation and classical music, Bach and Beethoven interpreted through American imagination, it destroyed our concept of American culture as inferior. The technical mastery, the artistic vision, the sheer joy of creation. We had nothing comparable." Animation was produced by Disney Studios for the Why We Fight series as well, but it was the feature animations that most affected the prisoners. Many had children in Germany they hadn't seen in years. The emotional impact of these family films, combined with their technical brilliance, created psychological conflict that propaganda couldn't achieve. Unteroffizier Werner Braun, an artist from Munich, spent weeks attempting to recreate Disney animation techniques. "American animators were decades ahead of us. If they could do this with cartoons, what else were they capable of?" The projection of films became education in itself. German POWs were often assigned to projection duty, maintaining and operating equipment that demonstrated American manufacturing excellence. The camps received films through the Army Motion Picture Service, which distributed 16mm prints to military installations worldwide. By March 1944, the system was delivering films to POW camps within 2 weeks of their theatrical release. These base camps had most of the facilities and services that could be found in a small town: dentists, doctors, libraries, movies, educational facilities, English language was the most popular course, and athletics, soccer was the most popular sport. At Camp Shelby, Gefreiter Helmut Wagner, a former projectionist at UFA Studios in Berlin, documented the American distribution system. Every week, new films arrived. Not propaganda ministry selections, but regular Hollywood productions. Musicals, westerns, comedies, dramas. The variety was incredible. In Germany, we might see 12 different films a year. Here, we saw that many in a month. The quality of film stock, surviving thousands of showings without significant degradation, exceeded anything German chemistry had produced. Dr. Friedrich Müller, a chemist from IG Farben interned at Camp Clinton, studied Technicolor through a magnifying glass during projection booth duty. 3-strip color process requires precision coordination beyond our industrial capacity. The chemical stability of dyes, the registration of multiple negatives, Each step represents years of development we hadn't achieved. Perhaps no genre shocked German POWs more than American musicals. In May 1944, Camp Hearne showed Yankee Doodle Dandy, starring James Cagney as George M. Cohan. The spectacular patriotic numbers, the energy of tap dancing, the integration of music and narrative, it was entertainment as ideology, yet so expertly crafted that even hostile audiences were swept along. Feldwebel Hans Richter noted, "We had been told Americans were uncultured. Then we saw Yankee Doodle Dandy, hundreds of dancers in perfect synchronization, songs that made you want to march despite yourself, production values that must have cost fortunes, and this was entertainment, not propaganda ministry output." The musicals demonstrated something else, American racial integration, however limited. When Stormy Weather was shown at Camp Shelby in June 1944, featuring Bill Robinson and Lena Horne, the all-black cast performing at the highest level of artistry challenged Nazi racial theories. While America's own racial problems were evident, the mere existence of such films, the celebration of black artists, was impossible in Nazi Germany. Within 2 months of their arrival, the Germans had decorated their mess halls with paintings, chandeliers, and Christmas ornaments, and had adorned their walls with family photographs. The camps had become communities where German culture mixed with American influences absorbed through film. By autumn 1944, American combat films began arriving in the camps. These weren't films about fighting Germans. The Special Projects Division carefully avoided films that might create resentment. Instead, they showed films about the Pacific War, allowing German POWs to see American military capability without feeling directly targeted. Guadalcanal Diary revealed American military improvisation and determination. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo demonstrated bombing capabilities that exceeded anything the Luftwaffe had achieved. Action in the North Atlantic showed the merchant marine's heroism in keeping supply lines open. Korvettenkapitan Otto von Minden, a U-boat commander held at Camp Clinton, watched action in the North Atlantic with professional interest. The film shows anti-submarine tactics we hadn't encountered. Either it's Hollywood fantasy, or the Americans have capabilities we didn't know about. Given what else we've seen, I fear it's the latter. The combat films served another purpose. They showed American self-sacrifice and heroism in ways that humanized the enemy. German soldiers who had been told Americans were cowardly saw films depicting individual courage that matched their own warrior ideology. April 1945 brought the war's end in Europe, and with it the most devastating films the German POWs would see. As American forces liberated concentration camps, the Signal Corps filmed what they found. Within weeks, these films were being shown in POW camps. The footage engendered shock, anger, and disbelief. Amazed and disbelieving prisoners nicknamed them Knochenfilms, films of bones. However, many prisoners accepted the films as factual. After compulsory viewing of an atrocity film, 1,000 prisoners at Camp Butner burned their German uniforms. At Camp Shelby, the screening of concentration camp footage on May 15, 1945, was preceded by an announcement. What you are about to see was filmed by American Signal Corps cameramen. No scenes were staged, no images were altered. The film ran for 20 minutes. The theatre, usually filled with conversation, was silent except for sobbing. Not all prisoners accepted the films initially. At Camp Hearne, several prisoners insisted the footage was fabricated. The American authorities responded not with punishment, but with evidence, copies of German documents, testimonies from American soldiers, additional footage from multiple camps. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. By June 1945, the film program had become central to the massive re-education effort. Der Ruf, or The Call, was a German-language newspaper published in Fort Kearny in Narragansett, Rhode Island during World War II by captured prisoners of war, POWs. It was distributed to about 140 other POW camps in the United States. The paper published 26 issues during its iteration as a POW paper published in the United States. Far from costing US taxpayers money, Der Ruf actually ended up making a small profit. The newspaper began reviewing films and discussing their meaning for Germany's future. A typical review from August 1945 discussed American cinema. These films show American soldiers returning home, struggling with peacetime, questioning their sacrifice. That America would make such films, showing doubt and difficulty rather than victory parades, demonstrates a maturity we must learn. Democracy means showing truth, even uncomfortable truth. The prisoners selected to come to Fort Kearney to write for Der Ruf represented an intellectual elite culled from the various prison camps. These intellectuals, writers, artists, professors, carefully selected for their anti-Nazi views, became film critics whose reviews shaped how hundreds of thousands of German POWs understood American cinema. The primary goal of Der Ruf was to persuade German POWs to focus on the future rebuilding of their country and to abandon Nazi ideas. No director influenced German POWs more than Frank Capra. His films, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Meet John Doe, You Can't Take It With You, presented an America that was both idealized and self-critical, patriotic yet questioning. Frank Capra became one of America's most influential directors during the 1930s, winning 3 Academy Awards for Best Director. His vision of American democracy, filtered through Hollywood sentiment, became the template for how many German POWs understood American values. George Marshall and even President Roosevelt recognized that Capra was Hollywood's #1 communicator to the public at large. For German POWs, Capra's films became primers in democratic thinking, showing corruption being defeated by common decency, individual courage against systemic power, and democracy not as perfect but as perfectible. An unexpected source of ideological transformation came through Western films. John Ford's Stagecoach, Howard Hawks' Red River, and other Westerns showed individual freedom, frontier justice, and self-reliance that resonated with German military values while subverting Nazi collectivism. Major Friedrich von Steuben observed, "The Western hero, alone, principled, fighting for justice without orders from above, this was the opposite of our military culture. Yet we admired these figures. They represented a freedom we hadn't understood. The Western landscape itself made an impact. The vast spaces, the unlimited horizons, the sense of possibility. It contrasted absolutely with the cramped, controlled spaces of Nazi Germany. Films became windows into a physical and psychological freedom that German soldiers hadn't imagined. At Camp Shelby, prisoners began writing their own westerns set in Germany, imagining lone heroes fighting against authoritarian forces. These stories showed the beginning of democratic imagination among former Wehrmacht soldiers. German prisoners at Camp Hearne, Texas, included members of a German military orchestra, complete with their instruments, who later supplied Camp Hearne with much-needed entertainment. These musicians began incorporating American musical styles learned from films. Jazz rhythms appeared in their compositions. Swing arrangements replaced martial music. Hauptmann Ernst Müller, conductor of the Camp Hearne Orchestra, noted, "American film music showed us possibilities we hadn't imagined. The integration of classical and popular forms, the emotional directness, the technical sophistication, it was a musical democracy where different styles coexisted and enriched each other." By late 1945, POW orchestras were performing arrangements of American film scores for other prisoners. Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz became particularly popular, its lyrics resonating with men far from home. Hollywood's portrayal of women profoundly affected German POW stars like Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, and Joan Crawford played independent, intelligent women who bore no resemblance to Nazi ideals of femininity. Woman of the Year, shown at Camp Clinton in September 1944, depicted a female journalist more successful than her husband, an impossibility in Nazi Germany. The presence of women in American films, not just as decoration but as protagonists, suggested a society where human potential wasn't limited by gender. For men raised in a rigidly patriarchal system, this was revolutionary. Some rejected it, but many began questioning the limitations placed on their own wives and daughters. American comedy films achieved what no propaganda could. They made German POWs laugh at authority and pretension. The Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello, Bob Hope, these comedians demolished dignity through humour. Duck Soup, shown at Camp Hearne despite concerns about its anti-war message, had German officers laughing at the absurdity of military pomp. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator was finally shown in October 1945. The reaction was complex. Some prisoners were offended, others found it cathartic to laugh at what had terrorized them. The film's final speech, Chaplin's plea for humanity over hatred, was translated and circulated in handwritten copies throughout the camps. Alongside Hollywood entertainment, POWs were shown American documentaries that demonstrated industrial and agricultural capacity. The City, The River, and The Plow That Broke the Plains showed American achievements and failures with equal honesty. These films, produced by government agencies, lacked the crude propagandistic tone of Nazi documentaries. Dr. Heinrich Bauer, an agricultural specialist from East Prussia, watched The River with professional interest. It showed American flooding problems, erosion, agricultural failures, yet also showed solutions being implemented. In Germany, we would never admit such failures. This honesty about problems, combined with confidence in solving them, was more convincing than any boasting. The Hollywood star system fascinated German POWs. The idea that actors were celebrities independent of state control, that they could choose roles, criticize studios, even mock political leaders, this suggested freedom beyond Nazi comprehension. When prisoners learned that Clark Gable had enlisted as a private and flew combat missions, that James Stewart was flying bombers over Germany, it shattered their image of American celebrities as decadent cowards. Marlene Dietrich, the German actress who had become an American citizen and entertained troops, was particularly controversial. Her films were both beloved and reviled, representing to different prisoners either betrayal or courage. By Christmas 1945, the cumulative effect of watching hundreds of Hollywood films had achieved what military defeat couldn't: the complete transformation of consciousness among most German prisoners of war. One survey of some 22,000 prisoners concluded that 74% of German prisoners left with an appreciation of the value of democracy and a friendly attitude toward their captors, while only 10% remained militantly Nazi. The Special Projects Division's final report noted, "Motion pictures proved our most effective tool for demonstrating American values. Films accomplished what lectures, books, and discussions couldn't. They made prisoners feel American democracy rather than merely understand it intellectually." After returning to Germany, Anders and Richter, along with several others from Fort Kearny, founded a new newspaper, also called Der Ruf. This iteration of Der Ruf grew to a circulation of 100,000 subscribers. These former POWs would later found Group 47, which dominated German literature for decades. Christmas 1945 provided a culmination of the film programme's impact. Special holiday screenings were arranged for German POWs, featuring films like Going My Way and Holiday Inn that showed American celebrations and values. At Camp Hearne, thousands of German prisoners watched these films that depicted ordinary American life with its hopes and struggles. The film's technical achievements, elaborate production numbers, sophisticated cinematography, emotional manipulation through editing and music, demonstrated American filmmaking at its peak. But it was the film's humanity that most affected the prisoners, showing them a society that could celebrate amid struggle. As German POWs began returning to Germany in 1946, they carried with them memories of American films that would shape their nation's reconstruction. Many rose to prominent positions in West German society, bringing lessons learned in darkened American theatres. POWs were guaranteed by an international treaty called the Geneva Conventions to get food, clothing, and medical care equal to that of their captors. But they received something more, a cultural education that would influence Germany's democratic development. The influence extended beyond elite prisoners. Thousands of ordinary German soldiers returned home with changed perspectives. They had seen racial integration in American musicals, women's independence in romantic comedies, workers' dignity in social dramas. These images couldn't be unseen. American films didn't just change German prisoners. The prisoners' responses changed American understanding of cultural diplomacy. The success of the film program influenced American occupation policy, leading to the establishment of Amerika Häuser, America Houses, throughout Germany, where American films were shown to German civilians. The Motion Picture Export Association, recognizing the impact of films on POWs, pushed for increased distribution of American films in post-war Germany. By 1950, American films dominated German theatres, continuing the cultural transformation begun in POW camps. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving German POWs held a reunion at Camp Hearne. Over 300 former prisoners returned, many bringing their families to show them where their transformation had begun. Former Obergefreiter Hans Müller, who had become a film distributor in Hamburg, spoke at the reunion. "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in racial superiority and cultural supremacy. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen through cinema's window a better way to live." The reunion included screenings of films the prisoners had watched 40 years earlier. Mrs. Miniver, Why We Fight, and Casablanca played again in the camp theatre. Former enemies, now allies, watched together, Americans and Germans united in recognition of cinema's transformative power. Former Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter delivered the keynote address. "Hollywood gave us what no military victory could, a vision of what we could become. We saw in American films not perfection but possibility, not propaganda but dreams made visible. The films showed us that strength came from diversity, that prosperity came from freedom, that culture flourished without state control." The magnitude of the film program in German POW camps reveals its systematic nature. Film infrastructure, over 380 camps equipped with projection facilities. Average of 4 film showings per week per camp. 16mm prints distributed through Army Motion Picture Service. Thousands of films shown across all camps from 1943 to 1946. Film consumption estimated millions of individual film viewings by German POWs. Average POW watched 150 to 200 films during captivity. Wide variety of Hollywood entertainment and documentaries, both current releases and classic films shown. Cultural impact: thousands enrolled in film discussion groups. De Roof published extensive film reviews and analysis. Many prisoners of war kept personal logs of films watched. Film viewing influenced post-war career choices. Post-war psychological studies revealed the profound impact of Hollywood films on German POW consciousness. Exposure to American commercial cinema achieved deeper psychological penetration than formal education programs. Films bypassed intellectual defenses, reaching emotional centers where ideology resided. The films worked through multiple mechanisms, creating emotional engagement with American characters, demonstrating alternative social systems, showing prosperity without conquest, and presenting individual freedom as strength rather than chaos. Entertainment created positive associations with American culture that propaganda couldn't achieve. Different film genres affected prisoners in distinct ways. Musicals demonstrated joy and energy that challenged German stereotypes. Westerns presented individual freedom that resonated with military honor while subverting collectivism. Comedies taught that authority could be mocked without revolution. Dramas showed psychological complexity equal to European art cinema. War films humanized American soldiers while avoiding demonization of enemies. Each genre carried implicit ideological messages that accumulated into comprehensive worldview transformation. The variety itself, that American society could produce such different expressions, suggested a pluralistic culture foreign to Nazi uniformity. Beyond cultural impact, American films provided technical education that influenced post-war German development. Prisoners studied cinematography, sound design, color technology, special effects, and distribution systems. This technical knowledge proved valuable in rebuilding German film industry after the war. Many former POWs found employment in cinema-related fields, bringing American methods to German production. They introduced techniques learned from watching Hollywood films, helping modernize German cinema in the 1950s. Films demonstrated democracy not through political speeches, but through narrative structures. Hollywood films typically showed individual agency, social mobility through effort, institutional criticism and reform, pluralistic values coexisting, and redemption through growth. These narrative patterns, repeated across hundreds of films, created new cognitive frameworks for understanding society. Films inadvertently provided economic education. Prisoners observed consumer culture, labor relations, entrepreneurship, market economy, and financial systems operating independently of government. This economic education proved valuable when prisoners returned to help rebuild Germany's economy. Many credited American films with helping them understand market mechanisms that would drive West Germany's economic miracle. The impact of Hollywood films on German POWs extended far beyond their imprisonment. Former prisoners became political leaders, bringing democratic values to German governance. Educators teaching American studies programs, business leaders applying entrepreneurial models, cultural producers creating German films influenced by Hollywood, and social reformers advocating for changes inspired by American social films. The transformation was so complete that by 1950, West Germany had become America's strongest ally in Europe. This rapid shift from enemy to friend was partially attributable to cultural preparation through cinema. Historians have called the film program one of the most successful soft power operations in history. Without coercion, without traditional propaganda, American commercial entertainment transformed enemy consciousness. German prisoners were housed in barracks that held up to 50 men. Each 5 barracks had a mess hall with cooks, waiters, silverware, and by all accounts very good food. But beyond physical comfort, they received cultural exposure that changed their worldview. The program succeeded because it relied not on argument, but on attraction. Films didn't tell prisoners what to think, but showed them different ways of thinking. Entertainment became education, stories became ideology, dreams became political transformation. On April 15, 1946, the last contingent of German POWs at Camp Hearne prepared for repatriation. The final film shown was The Best Years of Our Lives, depicting American veterans struggling with peacetime, an honest portrayal of difficulties that resonated with men facing their own uncertain return. As the credits rolled, the lights came up in the Camp Hearne theatre for the last time. German prisoners filed out, not as the Nazi warriors who had arrived 3 years earlier, but as men transformed by the power of Hollywood's dream factory. They had been stunned, educated, and ultimately converted by the simple act of watching movies. Their story stands as testament to culture's power over ideology, to soft power's triumph over hard force, to the profound truth that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a bomb, but a story well told. German POWs had arrived in America expecting to find a weak, divided nation. Instead, through Hollywood's lens, they discovered a civilization so confident it could criticize itself, so prosperous it could afford pure entertainment, so sophisticated it could produce art that transcended propaganda. They had watched American films, and they would never be the same. In their transformation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Germany. They had seen democracy performed on screen, and they would spend the rest of their lives trying to achieve in reality what Hollywood had shown them in dreams. The German POWs were stunned by watching Hollywood films in American POW camps, but more importantly, they were changed by them. And in that change lay the foundation for a better world, one movie at a time.